Evangeline, perched precariously on a ladder, adjusted a blueprint, the weight of the city skyline pressing down on her shoulders. Her latest project, the ambitious revitalization of a forgotten concert hall, demanded both innovation and reverence. A whisper of movement beside her startled her. "Mind if I join you?" A figure, tall and framed by the city's dusk, stood on the scaffolding, his shadow stretching across the scaffolding. A smile touched his lips as he looked down at her, eyes as blue as a summer sky. "Zander," he said, "the composer." She recognized the name. His reputation was built on operatic masterpieces that were as grand as they were melancholic. It felt oddly ironic that his presence now graced the skeletal remains of this forgotten symphony. "Evangeline," she replied, a nervous edge in her voice. "The architect." Her gaze fell to the worn blueprint. The notes of a future symphony, his and hers, were woven into its fabric. The first weeks were a blur of steel beams and whispered conversations. Zander, with a quiet grace that set him apart from the hubbub, was a ghost in the midst of the city's bustle. One evening, as the setting sun turned the sky a fiery orange, they stood on the stage of the gutted hall, his fingers tracing the weathered wood where countless stories had unfolded. It was once a place of dreams, a refuge for souls that found solace in melody. "We'll restore that magic, Zander." "Together," she assured him. He turned, his eyes mirroring the fire of the setting sun. His touch was light when he grazed her arm, sending a shiver down her spine. The city outside, a vibrant symphony of noise, seemed to fade as their gazes met, creating a silence more profound than any chord. Evangeline presented her vision, a tapestry of glass and steel, the building a breathtakingly sleek embodiment of modernity. But as she finished her presentation, Zander's face was a canvas of quiet consternation. "Too sterile. The music demands a deeper resonance," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. His words pierced through her, highlighting the stark contrast between their approaches. For him, music was emotion, tangible, and palpable. For her, architecture was about creating spaces where human lives intertwined, a silent symphony of movement and experience. Evangeline felt a sharp pang, realizing the divide between their creative universes. They were like two notes that resonated individually, but clashed when played together. They clashed over design concepts, the sharp edges of their ideas grating against each other. Evangeline argued for the modernity of her vision, while Zander clung to the sanctity of tradition. Their exchanges, often fiery, underscored the chasm between their worlds. "The world is evolving," Evangeline argued, exasperated. "The past cannot remain trapped in amber. Tradition is a thread that binds us to our souls," he countered, his eyes reflecting the pain of a world that seemed to be moving away from the things he cherished. But behind the sharp words, there was a tenderness, a silent yearning for a harmony they both felt was elusive. Late one night, working on a blueprint, Evangeline felt the soft click of a lock behind her. Zander stood there, holding a half-eaten sandwich in one hand, the other wrapped around a worn sheet of music. "A symphony," he said, his voice laced with emotion, an unfulfilled yearning. "It's my most recent piece, the first I haven't managed to complete." He handed the sheet to her, his eyes reflecting a vulnerability that made her heart ache. "We're different," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But we're not as far apart as we think." He moved closer, his hand finding hers. She looked at the fragile lines on the score, recognizing the symphony of his emotions reflected within the composition. They had grown to expect their differences, yet a curious shift occurred. Harmony began to bloom, unexpected and vibrant, weaving its way through their arguments and frustrations. "This design," Zander said, pointing to the blueprint, "it's not just modern. It reflects the space as a canvas, where music becomes movement." She saw the glimmer of understanding in his eyes. His artistic soul saw the symphony in her work. The walls were no longer a barrier, but an invitation to create a masterpiece together. A sense of shared understanding began to bloom, the two of them creating a harmony as poignant as any symphony. As the grand opening approached, the air thrummed with anticipation. As Zander had finished his composition, a powerful and emotional piece that would resonate through the hall, a reflection of his soul. The final touches were in place, and Evangeline was awestruck by the magnificence of the revitalized building. Standing on the stage, she met his eyes across the expanse of the concert hall. "It's beautiful," she whispered, her voice full of awe. A smile graced his lips as he returned her gaze, and in that instant, it wasn't just the building they shared, but a passion as profound as the notes that filled the space. The opening night arrived. A hushed crowd waited for the symphony to begin. Evangeline watched Zander as he took his place on the podium, the weight of anticipation in the room as thick as the velvet curtains. He raised his baton, and the first notes filled the hall, echoing through the architectural grandeur she had poured her heart into. Every note was a brushstroke, a touch of artistry on the canvas of the night. The symphony swelled and waned, but what stood out was a poignant stillness between each phrase, a silence as captivating as the crescendo. Her gaze found his, and she saw a reflection of the symphony within his eyes. The same melody, the same yearning, shared in a language beyond words. As the last notes of the symphony faded, a wave of applause swept through the hall, a testament to the genius that had unfolded on stage. Evangeline stood on the balcony, the applause fading like the notes of the symphony. "You've outdone yourself," she whispered as Zander came to stand beside her. He met her gaze, the reflection of a city in his eyes. "It was all you, Evangeline. You built the bridge for me to cross." Their gazes met, the city's glittering lights weaving a silent symphony around them. In the heart of the city's bustle, they were their own symphony, a rhythm of love woven into the fabric of the building they created. Evangeline and Zander, architects of love and symphony, began to carve their own melody into the bustling city, their passions entwining like the melodies they shared. They built, they created, they nurtured a connection that echoed the soul of their city. In the end, their story was not just about a building or a masterpiece. It was about finding harmony, embracing the notes of love that resonated between two souls, creating a symphony that played in the silent language of hearts.